Hello world of YouTube and welcome to the listening log update for March of 2022. I've got 8 records to talk about this month, a lot of stuff that I was excited for that dropped, some surprises that kind of piqued my curiosity, and MGK. Let's go ahead and get started on it.
To me now, speak loud and clear. Where would I fly if I was not here?
And the first album that I checked out was one that I was actually very excited for, if you guys caught my anticipated albums and games video that dropped back in January. It's the new Earthgang album, Ghetto. I finally checked it out because it finally came out. It was an album that had a couple pushbacks, a couple of delays. There were some points when during the promotion, I didn't even know if it was coming out anytime soon, if at all. But it's here, I've spun it, and I like it a lot. I actually like it a notch above their last album, Mirrorland, which I covered on the channel. I thought it was a solid outing from these two, showed their chemistry in pockets, had some bops and some vibes around. And I like that on Ghetto Gods, they do retain that chemistry. It's very palpable still, and they find ways to keep it smooth and bring some vibes in different pockets, like on the incredibly well-produced Amen and the closer Run 2, or have some, you know, weed-adjacent jams, like on Waterboy with great Jid and Cole features. The hook on that song is a little slippery, but I feel like by and large the track is still really well pulled together. And on Smoke Sub, which has a little more of a sort of reggae-adjacent tinge that I really enjoy. But I like that they bring, though, that energy that they kind of have been established to have, while also lighting a little more of a fire under their ass, proverbially, or sort of being a little more socially conscious in pockets that I think add some great points to the conversation, or at least give their own perspective in a really good way, like on the title track Ghetto Gods, that gets pretty personal feeling in the storytelling elements of that song, or the track American Horror Story, which also talks about sort of the general fear within part of the black community as far as their treatment in the country, while also pivoting to points of where they sit in the conversation or their perspective at it now that they are people that work within the industry, like on All Eyes on Me, or on the track Power, which has a great CeeLo Green feature. And I like that his verse kind of gives his perspective as somebody who's been pretty popular in the industry for a while now, and sort of his perspective as a black voice in the community. Power actually honestly kind of embodies some of the highs while also showing off some of the lows that the album has going on, because like I said, the Waterboy's hook was a little weak. I don't like contribution spoken word points on that song. When I saw his name in the feature list, I didn't even know what he was going to do, but I could take him or leave him on Power, to be honest. I'm not the biggest Future fan, and I don't really like Billy. It's a song that doesn't really do a whole lot for me, but like, it's got vibes. It's just not a track that I particularly liked on the record. But by and large, I would say amidst some of those pitfalls or some tracks that don't hit quite as consistently as others, this is still an even more consistent record than Mirrorland, and I appreciate that they are sort of spreading their own wings. I like a lot of the production on here. I think by and large it's pretty solid all around, and I think that, again, it's just them inching their way to even greener pastures from a group perspective, from a collective perspective. And I like this. I thought it was really solid. It was a really strong effort from these two. Giving it a 7. I think that if you enjoy good hip-hop, or if you enjoy hip-hop that has a decent amount of things going on, or a bunch of different ideas, or a handful of ideas under the same umbrella, you'll enjoy Ghetto Gods. I think that it is a pretty admirable project from these two, personally. Now, if you guys caught my listening party for this album early last month, you guys already got some raw first reactions for the project, but after sitting with it for some time over the last couple of weeks post that, I gotta say, man, this album is easily one of the strongest outings from this duo yet, and that's saying something, because they have a pretty stacked discography, IMO. I never really talked about Beach House, but I like Beach House a decent amount. You know, I talked about 7, that was the only record of theirs I've really ever discussed on the channel, and I thought that that was an incredible outing. You know, I've really enjoyed a lot of their catalog from the 2010s that they've put out. I think that their own synthetic blend of dream pop comes across incredibly well on most of their projects, and I feel like on Once Twice Melody, they're focusing on pockets of lushness with the string work, while also having some different synthetic influence creep in there in pockets, creates this dynamic, engaging experience that is truly transcendental. You know, you guys already know I loved a lot of the bops on this record from first listen, like Once Twice Melody or Runaway, Over and Over. Masquerade is incredible. It's got this sort of gothic bell synthetic sound that crops up throughout the instrumental that I adore. It gives me like underwater Turok vibes in the best way possible. You know, even on the tracks that I'm not as big on, have this crescendo at the end of the hook that just washes over me with bliss, like on Pink Funeral or Only You Know. Whenever the song finally comes around in itself and the name of the song comes around the bend, it's just this great euphoric drop that washes over me with joy. I also really enjoy a lot of the overall ambient driven tracks like ESP when the strings swell in that. It's fucking beautiful. I also feel like they kind of integrate a classic style to their hook writing in pockets that almost feels reminiscent of a different obsession I've had over the last 6 months or so. Bossa Nova. I got my own little pocket Bossa Nova binge I've been going on in the background, a la like Sergio Mendes and Brazil 66. And tracks like Once Twice Melody, even Superstar and Over and Over and Runaway have this classic 60s style in their chord progressions and crescendo production, and even just sort of the melodies used feel very vintage in that sort of way that only is enhanced by the additional accompaniment like the strings and stuff. You know, for all the praise that I can also throw to that vintage lushness, I do appreciate that they do also double down in rigid synthetics in some pretty stark ways. You know, I've already talked about tracks like Pink Funeral and Only You Know, and while those two songs are some of my least favorite on the record, I still don't hate them, you know, but the trap breakdown on Through Me is fantastic, and the fact that it bleeds into the synth arpeggio wonderland of Runaway, truly transcendental. I already talked about Masquerade's sort of vintage synth sounds, but I also love when they crop up on Hurts to Love. It almost has this sort of quirky 80s adjacent vibe that I'm all here for. This record is just all around a fantastic experience. You know, I think that this record is phenomenal. I think that it's a great utilization of its length. You know, I feel like there might be, and I could be completely wrong in this assumption about me, but I feel like by having a show like Redacted, it may say that I hate double albums or that I hate records that are longer in runtime, but that's not the case at all. Sure, I feel like some albums do really need a trim, and there are a handful of instances on that show where I've covered records that are a bit long in the tooth and could use a bit of a getting to the point. But I do love a handful of records, and I've even covered double albums that I love on Redacted and Mike Redacted that I just think are really good, but for the sake of the show, were fun to do this sort of thought experiment, you know, like the White Album and the Fragile. But like Once Twice Melody is a great modern representation of a band creating an idea or creating this experience that's very much longer form sonically and running with it to the horizons in the best way possible. And easily one of the best of the year contenders. I'm giving this a 9 out of 10. I think that it's fantastic. Truly a great experience, and one that I'm happy to see these two pull together in glorious splendor. So this new Ghost album has been pretty divisive amidst its community. There's still some fans that really like this thing and think that it's another strong outing from the band, and there's some in the community that do not think that and think that it's easily amidst, if not outright, their worst album. And I'm absolutely in that second camp. I cannot stand this fucking record, and I think that it is truly like one of the worst things I've listened to this year thus far. And don't get it twisted, I like Ghost. I like Ghost a decent amount. I've been a fan of theirs since Infest Assumum, and I gotta tell you, I didn't have the highest hopes for this record to begin with, and you could say that that's just kind of placating it in my opinion. But let me tell you something. I didn't like Prequel all that much. I thought it was a mid-record, and especially after following Melly Aurora, it felt like a disappointment. And I felt like the band at the time were in of two places they could have really gone. They could have shifted it back around and found a better way to integrate a good marriage of the soft ideas they were playing with on Prequel and Meliora with a better sense of harnessing the dramatics and gravitas of it all. Or they can completely shit the bed. And on Impera, they very much shit the bed. I didn't count Hunter's Moon as a single for this album because I didn't think it was going to be part of this album. But after hearing Call Me Little Sunshine and being pretty underwhelmed by it, along with seeing that Hunter's Moon was actually on the album, it just spelled disaster ahead. When bands incorporate soundtrack songs on a record, I feel like the band just isn't pulling together their best material. Rarely is the opposite the case. You know, even on a record that I enjoyed, like the last Post Malone album that had Sunflower on it for some reason, that record managed to be pretty solid. But this Ghost record, after Call Me Sunshine, and especially after 20s dropped, I had no hope for this record. And boy, let me tell you, it really doesn't have much going on. Yeah, it has this vintage 80s style production that could be endearing if harnessed correctly. It more showcases all of the cruxes that that production style has while having no songs to utilize in that sonic palette gratifyingly. You know, Kaiserian sounds like a fucking Power Rangers theme song. The drums on this album are so obnoxiously produced that they bury the rest of the band in some heavy doses like on Watcher in the Sky or Darkness at the Heart of My Love. Sure, I thought Spillways was a moderately okay song, but even it doesn't quite hit the mark in the way that I feel like the band has potential to. When the interludes are the strongest thing this album has going on outside of the movie single that dropped well before this album was even really fully announced, that also isn't a good look. I don't like this album. I think that the songwriting has definitely taken a dip in the way that it wasn't even this bad on Prequel. I feel like it isn't what I want out of a Ghost record, I guess. That's the best way I can put it. You know, it took all of what I didn't like about Prequel and drenched it in awful 80s style production that the band doesn't utilize or Tobias doesn't try to utilize in any gratifying ways. I feel like the hokiness that people rag on Ghost for are in more full of display than they've ever been before. And I don't like to see that. It's just not a good album, man. It's not a good look. I really hated this thing. I actively did not like it. And I think it's easily one of the worst things I've heard this year. 2 out of 10. Do not listen.
4 of us backstage, we say a prayer. Come out one by one and sound off. I see it like I'm there.
You know, one thing I was kind of surprised to see this month was Slaughterhouse discourse in the form of The Rise and Fall of Slaughterhouse, an album that chronicles the rise and fall of the rap supergroup that consisted of Crooked I, now King Crooked, Joel Ortiz, Joe Budden, and Royce da 5'9", and the first two are the ones that pulled this album together. They had been working together pretty intimately over the last couple of years, and they finally dropped a record that kind of talked about what really went down with Slaughterhouse, and a group that I honestly listened to a lot of back when they were big. You know, I reviewed their mixtape and album that came out in 2012 on the channel. I also had listened to their debut a moderate amount. I got into Slaughterhouse through Crooked I, because I got into Crooked I through his Tech 9 features. And I also knew who Royce was because of his features with other artists like Eminem, you know, and this was a fun record to be a fan of back in the day. And when they did kind of poof off the map, I was pillaging even farther into other ventures in hip-hop, but they were somebody that I always kept in the back of my mind as like a slice of time of somebody that I listened to. And even though this album isn't fantastic, there is a lot of good things that I have to say about it. You know, again, it's nice to see these two, at least, come together. I think that they still have pretty palpable chemistry, you know, and I appreciate how detailed they do get when talking about the group in general. You know, whether it is the meltdown of it in Vacancy, which juxtaposes or puts their house imagery that they had on those two projects that I reviewed into a little more of just in the rear view sort of scenario. You know, there is Vacancy at the Slaughterhouse, which also continues on Ain't Nobody Mad, which continues to drag Joe Budden through the mud while also putting up Royce to 5'9", because clearly Royce didn't fucking do anything, I'm sure. And even talking about some of the failed prospects and fuck Glasshouse a little more intimately. I like those prospects that the album delves into, while also reflecting on their time together in a group, like on Backstage, or in Still in My Feelings, which has them chopping up over this smooth instrumental. This record's honestly really solid. I mean, by and large, like, again, I don't think it's like the best album I've heard all year, especially in hip-hop, but it was kind of fun to get a peek behind the curtain of this project with one of the members that got me into the group and one of the members that I liked when walking away from the group, you know, and I truly believe, given the other rappers that played, that is how that went down, because Joe has had some pretty public meltdowns, which they address on here, including some controversies of statements he made about Eminem, you know, bucking the statements on the record at the same time of saying that M made them when they were around before. Eminem helped put them on the map, in tandem with, again, leaving Royce to 5'9" out of it, because yeah, he did have some pretty big success post the Slaughterhouse meltdowns, but I doubt that his success and his sort of dissection from the group was as big of a chasm as whatever the fuck Joe was doing, man. And listen, honestly, this album's biggest faults aren't anything that I would say is ultimately bad. It's just stuff that I don't completely listen to or indulge in that intensely as a fan of hip-hop anymore. I like Sly Piper on Floodwaters, but I think the track goes on for a little too long for how monotonous its beat is, and Crooked and Joel don't add a whole lot to the song to spice it up. I also don't really like Brothers Keeper 2 all that much. It again feels just kind of like a non-song to kind of spice up the track listing and runtime just a little bit, you know. I appreciate this record by and large, though. I think that it's a really solid outing. I also really like how in the last song they do apologize to the fans. They do really want to just make this album for the fans of Slaughterhouse. And as somebody who was a fan of Slaughterhouse, I appreciated aspects that were delved in on this record. And I thank Crooked Eye and Joel for putting it out there. I'd honestly give it like a 6 out of 10. It's a solid-ass record. It's got some real lulls and some low points that I don't think are as interesting, but when the guys do pull together a quality track, it's pretty quality on here. And I feel like if you were a fan of Slaughterhouse or you've enjoyed Crooked Eye and Joel Ortiz's output in recent years, give this a spin. It may give you some memories that you'll enjoy looking back upon. It may even make you respin those Slaughterhouse records, oddly enough.
You struck me down like lightning, lightning. You struck me down like...
You know, Charli XCX has been in a really good creative pocket with her last couple of records. Her self-titled album, Charli, saw her throwing her hyperpop love into the horizons before pulling that extreme intensity within hyperpop into this intimate feeling box of How I'm Feeling Now. She's just doing some really good stuff. And while this new album, Crash, does show off a huge stylistic shift in some regards that she was promoting was going to happen, I feel like she sticks the landing on this album far more often than she doesn't. And it sees her kind of dipping her toes into a bunch of different ponds and seeing where she really thrives in the realms of pop. It's a sort of subgenre gambit pop record in the vein of like what Gaga was doing on The Fame, but introducing other collaborations that help fortify this in much more of a retro spin realm. You know, the grooves on Crash and Constant Repeat and the incredible collaboration Beg For You with Rina Sawayama are giving dance floor spins a la kind of what Gaga was doing on Chromatica, but with more of a Charli XCX oomph. And I feel like tracks like Beg For You and New Shapes are incredible collaborations that come together so very well. I also love seeing Caroline Polachek and Christine and the Queens pulling this 80s style synth throwback very, very well. A style that kind of crops up on the closer twice as well, which almost feels like a sort of, again, the Fame style spin on 80s synth pop in a really fun package. I also love the drop on Move Me when the track cuts and her voice soars into the front before the instrumental comes back in. Pop Serenity! And the vocoded, almost Imogen Heap style vocal production on Lightning is fantastic, and it lets the hook hit you like a lightning bolt. It's a great song. But for all of those highlights, I will say there are a couple instances where this album does kind of undercut itself in some of the execution. Like, I think the only on-the-nose point where the album gets really cyclical and it feels purposeful is on Constant Repeat. But Baby doesn't really do anything for me. I think that its repetitive style is a bit monotonous. And I think Every Rule is kind of one of the weaker tracks on the album, too. I also feel like for some of the bold ideas that this album tackles, like on Yuck especially, I love the funk groove on that song. I feel like it transitions into one of the messier songs on the album, Used to Know Me, which is a song that I don't really enjoy. I feel like its instrumental backdrop is a little more on the blander side, while I feel like Charli does still give a pretty good performance on the song, and I dig the hook of it a lot. I feel like the overall sonic palette that song is working with, especially when coming off of one of the funkier jams, Yuck, just doesn't do anything for me. But by the strengths of this record far outweigh the weaker tendencies and give way to what I would say is a really solid pop album. If you want some good dance bops, some good pop collaborations, and if you want to see Charli XCX sort of throw a lot at the wall and see what sticks, give Crash a spin. I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. I really thought it was a solid pop album, but it was definitely not quite as consistent as her last couple of records. I'm still not counting her out, though, because I adore Charli, and I think she's a great pop star.
Clear a path as I keep on walking. Ain't no stopping in this dirty, filthy, rotten, nasty little.
Now, you guys may or may not know this, but I think Denzel Curry is one of the most consistent rappers working right now, and I feel like out of rappers that really came to prominence in the back half of the 2010s, he's easily one of the strongest voices to come out of that era. I think if we're talking rappers out of the South, easily got the best batting average for as much as I gas up Big Crit. I definitely think Denzel is far more consistent. Dude's never had an L in his career yet. And Melt My Eyes, See Your Future is not only another great stylistic shift for him, but is one of his smoothest albums to date. I love this thing. Back to front. All killer, no filler experience that sees Denzel being even more reflective, deconstructing his own headspace and his own personal feelings on where he's at in his career. Whether it's the lead single, Walkin', which has one of my favorite beat switch-ups that he's had in a song yet, when he comes back in and he's like, no, don't drop the beat, bring it back, let me talk, I felt that shit. And some of the tolls it's taken on him the longer that he's been doing it, like on Mental or In Troubles, two great hook-driven songs that have great collaborations with Bridget Perez and T-Pain. Y'all know I love Saul Williams, so to see him do this sort of very bleak spoken word section on the back half of Mental was also a nice treat for me personally. He's also got some incredible genre experiments, like on the very auto-tuned vocal-heavy Kxng, which I've seen some people throw some shade towards, but I think it's another really strong song in the project. Obviously, I love the Wu-Tang stuff on Smell of Death. I think it bleeds really well into Sanjuro, which is another fucking just rugged-ass tune with Denzel that also just mind-blowingly throttles itself brilliantly into Zatoichi, the collaboration with Slow Tie, that has this great drum and bass instrumental behind it that is fucking awesome. I think that this is, by the by, another fantastic record from Denzel. You know, I can easily see Melt My Eyes being considered a benchmark record in Denzel's catalog. For as much as I've liked, you know, the bangers on Imperial and on Zoo and how well he integrates his personality into that, I like how he took the concept of his album Taboo and dissected the smoothness on that and brought it into a bigger prominence in a way that I feel like suits the brand of retrospective reflection that this album presents, while not losing sight of what brought him to prominence to begin with. I think that this is a 9 out of 10 record, easily one of his best. Like, I immediately have been already looking to buy it for my collection because I like it about as much as I liked Imperial. I think that it is, again, just a showcasing of his talents as a writer. His flows on this record are insane. His ability to be playful over these smooth and sometimes psychedelic instrumentals works incredibly well in his favor. I feel like the collaborations on here, again, are incredible. I think Ain't No Way is a fantastic posse cut. And I feel like it comes in at the perfect point on the record following the much more hook-driven Mental and Troubles, and I feel like it lends itself really well to bleeding into Kxng. Again, the smoothest record in his catalog. From a sequencing perspective, this is it, my dude. This is top-notch how to sequence your record fantastically. And yeah, again, easily one of my favorites of the year, easily one of the best in Denzel's catalog, and worth your time, full stop. You know, something I didn't expect to see happen more than once in the modern metal landscape was a minimal ambient synth record following up an intense metal record, but Blood Incantation have in fact pulled a page out of Loath's playbook and done that exact thing with their latest album, Timewave 0. An album that is consisting of 2 songs that are 20 plus minutes in length and are, again, minimally driven synthetic soundscapes that have a little more of a sci-fi twinge to some of their reverb-soaked style, or at least it feels in the line of something that can play in the backdrop of like a science fiction movie. But I gotta say, even though them doing a minimal synth record makes a little more sense than Loathe, I don't know if Blood Incantation pulled off a full W with this project, Timewave 0. I really like the production on it. It feels very airy and lo-fi, and it works incredibly well in the record's favor, but I feel like, for as much as I love minimal, you know, music, I love film soundtracks and the like, I don't think the first piece of these 2 pieces, the I.O. piece, is nearly as interesting as the EA piece. You know, I feel like the EA piece feels like it has a little bit more going on. You know, the movements integrate more weaving of chords and some note progressions and stuff, and it feels a little more compelling, whereas the I.O. portion is like very bare bones minimalism. Like it is very much the minimal portion of minimalism. There's very little in the way of anything happening in the first couple of movements yet. Like, yeah, there's some synthetic buzzing happening here and there, but it takes a while for that slow burn to really get the ignition going. And I don't feel like it builds to a crescendo that lends itself for that much of an ambient buildup. You know, I'm all for a good slow burn if the payoff is worth it. And I feel like the EA portion, if that is in fact the payoff for the IA movement, I still don't think it's that good. It's good. I like the EA portion. It saves this record from any sort of low score because it utilizes the production a lot better. You know, especially once the third moment creeps in and its buzz starts and the guitars really start to dance in the background, it creates a really good moment that I think the song has built up to very satisfyingly. You know, I just feel like, man, the second movement has some cool ideas with its low-end playing that feels very menacing, and the scope kind of feels like it's realized, but it's not it. It's really not it. Like, it's very, very unfortunately underwhelming as hell. Its second piece gives it a 6. That second song, I feel like, is much more worth it than the first song. And that second song is pretty stinking nice. Like, it's pretty fucking cool. That first half, it is very much the epitome of, like, a back-heavy album. Like, the most back-heavy album that has ever existed.
I fell in love with an emo girl. I'm in love with an emo girl.
I wasn't sure if I was really gonna listen to this album. I already didn't like Tickets to My Downfall. It wasn't a project that I think brought anything of interest to the table for the medium of music. I thought it was very bland. I thought it was a very derivative album in a way that I know it was trying to be very tongue-in-cheek about, but I think just failed at that execution. And because of that album's success, I'm not surprised mainstream Sellout really does try to play up that aspect of Machine Gun Kelly tackling this music, but I still don't care. I still think that it's not good. And it may just be because I just don't like MGK. I've never really found him to be that great of a rapper. I feel like it makes sense for him to bring it back on parts of this record because hey, stick to what you know. While you're not the best rapper, you can at least do it in a more technically proficient way than you can singing. And for as much of a whiplash as it is, it makes sense for it to be here, because if he's gonna try and cash in on anything, for an album called Mainstream Sellout, him doing a trap song with Lil Wayne makes a lot of sense. And the Dying California hybrid, a la what a lot of what pockets of the scene are doing, makes sense from like a business perspective. But those tracks, which I already don't like, don't mesh well with the stuff that he's trying to continue from Tickets to My Downfall that I also don't like on the title track, or God Save Me, or Emo Girl, or even Wake Up Sex. Like, there's a lot of what he was doing on that album on here, and I still think it sucks. And even the moments where he's trying to rein that in and just make better punk songs feel so half-baked. Like, World War IV has potential. It feels like an offshoot like Offspring song. But the song ends before it ever really gets going. And I think adding Ollie Sykes to a song does bring a decent amount to the table, but maybe just ain't it, Chief. And not even just sonically. Lyrically, he's also trying to do what he was doing on Tickets to My Downfall, but he's adding even more sincerity to that, which I think makes sense, maybe to him, but I feel like it creates an even bigger divide between what you're pitching and what you're giving. You know, you've got these songs like Emo Girl and stuff that are supposed to placate to a younger demographic, yet you're throwing lyrics in there that are talking about stuff like, or that could be real to you, but create that divide between your target audience and who you're writing for. And it works in some instances for some bands. You know, that's what some people have been praising about the latest Blink-182 records. It just doesn't work as well for you, MGK. I feel like this is just a conflicted, complicated mess that is all the more disengaging and all the worse to put yourself through. If anything I could give to Tickets to My Downfall, it's at least a product that is consistently tonal throughout, or at least feels like it's channeling something consistently that cohesively works. This isn't even that, and it makes it all the more worse. This record is just not great. And I really didn't like it. Sure, there were elements I liked more than all of Tickets to My Downfall. But again, so few and far between. This is getting a 1 out of 10. It is not good, and I didn't like it. And that was my March. What did you think about these albums? Is there anything you would like me to listen to? Leave it in the comments down below and let me know your thoughts on these reviews. If you like this, be sure to give it a like. If you want to see more of my music, gaming, and general nerd content, be sure to subscribe. Special thanks to my patrons. If you want to join their ranks to get early access to content, exclusive content, or to help drive the community, is linked in the description. And always remember, share me with your friends. If you like what I do and you want to see more people engaging with my stuff, show me off to your friends. Tell them about your favorite obscure YouTuber, and hopefully it's me. But I'm going to go. I've been Viral Rack. You guys have good ideas, laughs, and situations. And I'll see you another day.